Hi, my name is Zim Okoli, one of the church leaders at New Life Church Catford. Welcome to our Spotlight event. This section is going to be the talk. We're going to be thinking about the topic of what is coronavirus teaching us about being human. Well, in an article in The Independent last month, Sharpie Korsandi, a British comedian, entitled her article, "Coronavirus has left me with an identity crisis. Without comedy, who am I?" Now, of course, as a comedian, she begins the article in a very sort of tongue-in-cheek method. She says, "I've never been so grateful to have this column to write. I'm taking my time and typing really slowly to make it last." But she goes on to a more serious note, and she says this: "Overnight, I've gone from every moment dominated by work, traveling and writing, to all being cancelled." And she says, "Without my job, I'm not entirely sure who I am." Now, of course, we can't compare this identity crisis with the hundreds of people dying every day, sadly, from coronavirus. That is the true full cost of this tragedy. But I take it for most of us, this is going to be how we experience the impact of the COVID-19 crisis. It is going to be that for most of us, we're going to have this sense of being rudderless, floating in a sea of conflicting emotions, from anxiety to boredom to low self-esteem, as many things that we normally relied on seem to have just disappeared all at once overnight. Whether it's that creative job that was really highly demanded that we loved, or whether it's the travel experiences that we hope to have that are now cancelled, whether it's the friends we can no longer see. And so it raises a question: if the things that make me who I am can all of a sudden be taken away overnight, who am I? What grounds can we all have for human identity? See, in the Western world, we've tried several options. In past centuries, the West was actually a very traditional society. Think about Jane Austen novels, arranged marriages and pecking orders at banquets. This is a world where who you are is defined by your duty and your role in the community. Now, whilst that maintains stability, many people find that kind of society and approach to identity oppressive. And so, by and large, we've abandoned that. In some parts of the world, you can still find this with the caste system, for instance, in India. And so in the West, as the 19th century Enlightenment rolled on, some people began to try naturalism as an approach to human identity. This is that who you are is defined by evolutionary biology. The writer Yuval Noah Harari, in his landmark book *Sapiens*, tries to describe the impact that this would really have on human identity. He talks about how the US Declaration of Independence would actually have to say that not that all people are created equal, but that all people evolved differently. And it would also have to say not that everyone has certain unalienable rights, but that actually everyone has mutable, that is changeable characteristics. And so even if naturalism might pass for good science, it seems to be quite unbearable as a basis for human identity. You see, if death, for instance, is just nature strengthening the gene pool, then of course we wouldn't give COVID wards to those who we know are vulnerable and are likely to die anyway. Now, most people in the post-modern, post-Christian Western world have settled for what some have called expressive individualism. Let me explain what this is. The existentialist philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, in the 20th century, he saw that naturalism inevitably means that we live in an absurd universe where there is no underlying meaning to anything. It's just a universe of chance. But he proposed that we make a sort of optimistic leap of reasoning and say that we can make our own meaning by being authentic. We are who we are based on our expressing ourselves in an act of will. Now, whether we realize it or not, this is actually the approach to identity most of us have signed up to in the West. It's about being true to yourself, whether it is having that creative career, or whether it's pursuing those experiences of seeing the world, or whether it's paying £5.50 for a flat white. Be true to yourself. That is where most of us have settled. Except that the coronavirus is teaching us this, isn't it? That those things that we're trying to be true to ourselves about can all just be taken away at a drop of a hat. And so the coronavirus crisis is presenting us with a choice. Do we just double down our resolve on the same old approach to identity? Well, it's been famously said, hasn't it? Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Or do we try to find a better, more reliable basis for who I am? And I just want to present to us two things that the Christian faith might say about being human. We're going to see identity as image and identity as love. Firstly, then, identity as image. On almost the first page of any Bible, you would hear and read these words. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Genesis chapter 1, verse 27. You see, according to the Bible, who I am is an image of God, the imago Dei, made to reflect his perfection. You see, Christians have worked out over the centuries that the imago Dei frees us from making false choices about our identity. You see, in a traditional worldview, for instance, you have to be defined by your community. That is what makes you who you are. In our postmodern worldview, we say, well, only you know what's best for you. That's what makes who you are. The imago Dei cuts through this. It says, on the one hand, that you are an individual of great worth. I mean, you're created in God's image to reflect God. But on the other hand, you are created for community. God made mankind. He made them male and female. And so it's why in lockdown, we instinctively express our individual creativity by actually pursuing community, whether it's Netflix parties or working out with Joe Wicks or volunteering for the NHS. Let's look at another example. A traditional worldview tries to enforce moral absolutes on everyone. Everyone must conform. Whereas a postmodern worldview says actually it's all about free choice, emphasize free choice. Well, the imago Dei cuts through this. See, God doesn't force us, does he, to follow his standards, but he created human beings with the power of free choice because he himself is a choosing God. And yet, because we are an image, we have a responsibility to make choices that reflect the perfection of God. And so it's why instinctively we are outraged when we hear about a man in the USA who stockpiled 17,000 bottles of hand sanitizer. You see, contrary to Gordon Gekko, we know that greed is not good. And so the COVID crisis is teaching us how precious it is to have the imago Dei hardwired into what it means to be a human being. Even in our post-Christian Western world, we are riding off the back of our Christian past. You see, because Roman Christians rescued and abandoned babies from an undignified death, we still today want to make sure that the elderly receive the same COVID care in ICU as the young and fit. Because British Christians abolished the slave trade as dehumanizing, we won't prioritize COVID income support based on race or social background. The imago Dei, identity as image. Secondly, we're going to see this, that the Christian faith points to identity as love. In his book, The City of God, St. Augustine wrote these words. He shunned the idea that people are defined by what they do, and instead he suggested this, that a people is the association of a multitude of rational beings united by a common agreement on the objects of their love. The worse, he says, the objects of this love, the worse the people. Or to put it another way, a modern Christian philosopher, James K.A. Smith, says this, that we're not so much Homo sapien, that is a thinking thing, but Homo liturgicus, that is a loving, worshipping thing. Now, Augustine and James K.A. Smith did not make up these things. They got them from Jesus, from hearing his teachings. Here's what Jesus says in the Gospel of Luke in chapter 9. He says these words, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me will save it." Luke chapter 9, verse 23 to 24. You see, Jesus' basic principle there is this. Security of identity is determined by your ultimate love. As C.S. Lewis puts it famously, he explains it this way. Look for yourself and you will find in the long run only hatred, loneliness, despair, rage, ruin, and decay. But look for Christ and you will find him, and with him everything else thrown in. You see, let's not get it wrong. Jesus is not saying you shouldn't love your family or your job. It's definitely not saying that. He's just saying that these good things were never meant to take the weight of being the ultimate thing that gives our identity a ground. You see, he says, make these things your identity and they'll end up crushing you. You know, if what makes you a good parent is successful kids, well then, lockdown is going to be a time of crippling anxiety because, well, now it's down to you to homeschool them and make them all little Einsteins. If what gives you self-worth is the friends and company you keep, well then, lockdown is going to mean crushingly low self-esteem because you can't see those friends and hardly any of them are bothering to ring you. You see, Jesus suggests that only he can take the weight of being our ultimate love. He says, lose your life for me. That is not saying go and kill yourself, but let your love for me control all your other loves. And then you will save your life. That is, you will in the end actually receive a more secure identity. How is this? Well, in that verse, Jesus also said that we should deny ourselves and take up our cross. He was actually describing what he himself has first done for us. You see, Jesus in history loved us enough to deny himself and literally die on a cross in our place. You see, when we experience COVID threatening our identity, it is a hint, a sign that maybe we've been driven by disordered loves for created things above our Creator. And that is what the Bible calls sin, or in other places, idolatry. But Jesus came as a substitute. He was, on the one hand, judged as a sinner, so that we could, on the other hand, be welcomed like saints. But yet, in losing his life, he saved it. On the first Easter, God raised him to life, affirming his claims as Messiah, the King, the ruler over all. And now he says to us, here's a secret to a secure identity. Love this crucified risen Jesus above all your other loves, and you'll find your real life. You'll find who you really are. See, if lockdown, for instance, makes you realize that your friends aren't genuine, yes, that's disappointing. But you can be disappointed without low self-esteem. You can say to yourself, God's affirmation is of infinite worth. And I already have this because he sent Jesus to give his life for me. If you lose that creative job that you loved during the COVID crisis, it's confusing. But you can be confused without being crushed. You can say to yourself, look, I never expected a job to complete me. Because Jesus rose from the grave, I'm as sure as day follows night that I will have my flourishing in eternity without any ruin in a new resurrection existence. Look, these are the things that I just wanted to put out there that the Christian faith shows us. Identity is image, identity is love. And it might be that those things begin to make sense to us. Thanks for listening.